Hello and welcome back to another reading. New chapter of Home Finds Grian by Dragons Are Cool on AO3. Chapter 6 Socializing the New Bird. Over the following week, Grian's progress stagnated. He was quiet and withdrawn, with each night interrupted by violent nightmares. But then, one night it didn't happen again. Mama was excited that his friend seemed to have finally gotten a full night's sleep again, until he saw him the following morning. Grian. Mumbo's shoulders slumped in disappointment. His friend looked at him lazily, not quite awake enough to fully respond. Did you sleep at all? He shook his head. Why didn't you wake me? I would have helped you. Mumbo sat down on the side of the bed next to his friend, but Grian shook his head again. I didn't sleep so I wouldn't have the nightmares, he muttered. You can't just do that, Grian. You need sleep, Mumbo gently chastised. He just shrugged. I'm fine. You are not fine, Grian, Mumbo protested. You will be. We'll get you through this, mate. But you can't just not sleep. Grian was quiet for a moment, just staring at his hands in his lap. He sighed. I just wanted a break. Mumbo tugged Grian into his arms then and just held him. They had a quiet day in after that. Mumbo worked to try and keep his friend awake in the hopes he'd be exhausted enough to sleep properly that night. And when it came time for sleep again, he stayed with Grian until he was certain the avian was actually asleep. It hadn't taken long for him to look asleep, as exhausted as he was, but Mumbo stayed a while longer anyways, just to be sure. And that night, he did sleep through the night, once again too exhausted for the dreams to reach him. So with the rare, well-rested Grian, Mumbo broached a new idea over breakfast. Do you want to meet your cousin again soon? Grian was hesitant. Does he know already? Mumbo shook his head. I haven't told him yet. It was his turn to give pause. I wasn't really sure how. You said he lives nearby? Mumbo nodded. I guess he'll find out eventually then. Mumbo nodded again. I can give him a call then after we finished eating. Today? Grian nearly chirped. Is that okay? Grian took a steady breath and shivered, feathers fluffing up involuntarily. I guess so. He relented anyways. You'll be okay, Grian, Mumbo reassured him. I promise. Mumbo was sure the reunion would be fine. The hurdle of the phone call, though. Mumbo, you can't just go saying things like that. Jimmy's anger was only thinly veiled as annoyance, and the hurt beneath that was also clear as day. It's been almost 20 years, mate. We have to move on. He trailed off. Jimmy, I promise, Mumbo sputtered. You know I wouldn't lie about this, right? I know, Jimmy shot back. But do you realize how crazy you sound right now? Jimmy? Grian decided to try his luck and speak up himself. They were met with a long, heavy silence over the line. Eventually, in far quieter and calmer, Jimmy replied, I still don't believe you. I'll be over in 20. The call cut off with a click. Grian was pacing, slowly, but still pacing as they waited. Mumbo hadn't been able to get him to settle down, and as his efforts only seemed to rile him up more, he'd taken to letting the now avian pace, while he folded up the couch so they didn't have room to sit. Grian finally stopped when the knock sounded on the door. Mumbo went to answer it, greeting Jimmy with a quiet nod, not having the words, before stepping aside so he could see Grian. Jimmy slowly stepped inside and allowed Mumbo to close the door, never taking his eyes off his long-lost cousin. They stood quietly, eyeing each other, both searching for recognition, with differing levels of success. "You look a bit like him," Jimmy finally stated. "I'm Grian." He responded a little lamely. "You don't sound so sure about that," Jimmy accused. "Jimmy," Mumbo scolded. "I don't remember anything that happened before they took me," Grian's response in a comparable tone, ignoring Mumbo's attempt to bring things somewhat kinder. "They took you?" Jimmy sobered. "And he escaped," Mumbo jumped in. "And then I found him a couple weeks ago behind the ice cream shop." "That's ridiculous." Grian only nodded, casting his eyes to the floor. The three of them sat in silence a while, mostly letting Jimmy process what he was seeing. "You really are, Grian." He nodded again. Jimmy hummed and continued studying him before he suddenly fluffed out his vibrant yellow wings, before allowing them to smooth over again. Grian mimicked the motion with his own mottled brown ones. "Those are new," his cousin observed. They did this to me." Grian had yet to look back up at Jimmy. The born avian didn't want to dwell on the uncomfortable aspects of their shared story any more than the rest of them. So he strode over to a bookshelf. Mumbo hadn't moved it once since he'd left. He'd never been one for change. He selected the book, also from exactly where he'd left it. Its cover was worn and well-loved. "Do you know what kind of bird you are, then?" The swift change in topic and tone got Grian to lift his head and shake it. "Want to find out?" He held up the old bird book to show him. It was one of the few belongings that had made the journey over with them. They'd found Grian's mother's book in the rubble not long before Exuma found them. "All right." Grian turned a shrug into a nervous shrinking, ruffling his wings up a little as he did. Jimmy tipped his head at the nervous gesture, but chose to press on. He dropped onto the couch and patted the spots next to him. Mumbo sat down first while Grian hovered, still on the nervous side. Can you show us your wings, Grian?" Mumbo gave him an out from sitting yet. "Right," he muttered quietly and opened his wings a bit. He turned to the side and held them forward to show them off the backs of them without turning his back on them. Jimmy shared a quiet look with Mumbo before really turning to the book. Grian's wings were narrow and fairly sharply pointed. The scaly patterning was made up primarily of whites and browns, with bits of rust in some areas. Jimmy flipped to the shorebirds and started narrowing it down from there. Jimmy hummed in contemplation. "Can we see your tail?" Grian turned carefully, keeping Jimmy in his periphery, still as he fanned his tail. The finely barred feathers of more brown and white gave him a better idea. 20 minutes and a bit of extra searching for more photos to be sure, and Jimmy had figured it out. "Looks like you're a bar-tailed godwit, then." He passed Grian the book to see for himself. "They fly further in one go than anything else, you know." Grian read over the brief description of the bird. "Do you think that's why I finally tried to escape? 'Cause I could?" "What do you mean? Did you only get the wings recently?" Grian swallowed thickly and shook his head. He looked to Mumbo pleadingly. He's not always the same type of bird, mate," Mumbo explained instead. Jimmy tipped his head in genuine confusion. He said it changes when he molts sometimes. That is something. Jimmy looked back to Grian again, who was still standing, trying to look small across from the couch. How long have you been this, then? Almost a year? Jimmy sat there watching Grian a moment longer, tapping a rhythm out on his knee as he thought. Wanna play Uno? It had the desired effect, surprising Grian enough to fully look up at him again. His wings and shoulders even dropped a tiny bit lower from his ears. Uno? The card game? Jimmy pressed again. I don't remember it. He frowned. Well, I'll teach you. It's not hard. Jimmy slid off the couch to sit on the floor at the coffee table. He pulled the deck out of his sweater pocket and started shuffling. Plus, if you don't remember how to play, maybe Mumbo and I will stand a chance for once, he joked. Mumbo huffed at that, before sitting down at the end of the coffee table and patting a spot across from Jimmy for Grian to sit. He joined them. Jimmy dealt a hand and explained the rules. They played a practice round with their hands revealed so they could show him the allowed moves. Then the game began. Grian's first win on the first game could be blamed on luck. The second on the second was a coincidence. Uno! Grian plopped down his second to last card. Looks like we still don't stand a chance, Jim. Alongside this, he drew 4 cards. What color? Grian made a show of deciding. Let's go blue. Does it even matter? It doesn't even matter to you, does it? Jimmy complained. Nope! Grian chirped happily. One turn later, and Grian was out, winning again. That was fun. Grian stood as Jimmy moved back up to the couch. Mumbo stayed on the floor, content leaning back on an arm. For you, Jimmy fired back. Hey, Jim? The taller avian looked up, startled at being addressed directly by his cousin after how shy he'd been. But he looked up to see Grian looking at him dead in the eye before grinning and checking out his wings, allowing several stashed Uno cards to fall free and flutter to the floor. Jimmy's eyes widened, just about bugging out of his head, and he sucked in a breath. Why, you? He shook his finger at Grian as he stood as well and came around the coffee table. You cheater! You are... He deflated a bit, eyes burning a bit. You are Grian. Grian nodded again a little sadly. Sorry. Jimmy huffed a quick laugh, sitting firmly in denial of the fact he was about to cry, and stubbornly ignoring the tightening of his throat as a result. Don't apologize, just... He wiped his sleeve across his eyes and helplessly opened his arms. He played it off as a shrug if he had to. But Grian hugged him first. Jimmy wrapped him up tightly in his arms and wings alike. Grian was taller than he'd been when he left originally, obviously, though not extraordinarily, so even though he had been just a kid, Jimmy, on the other hand, was much, much taller than he had been. It made him that much easier to wrap up and hold on to, and Grian didn't mind much, only voicing any protest when Mumbo joined and wrapped them both in his arms, squishing Grian in between them. But even then, he made no move to escape. Awkward reunions aside, things went smoother for the 3 of them over the coming weeks. Jimmy even managed to help Mumbo get Grian out of the house a while. Sure, it was just to go hang out at Jimmy's apartment for a change of scenery, but it was something. Then came the time when Mumbo's seclusion while he took care of Grian got a bit much, even for the hermits. Scar invited him and Grian over to his apartment for dinner one night. And Mumbo got the distinct idea that this was sort of a last chance before Dad Suma gets involved kind of deal. So he agreed to try and spare Grian from Exuma and the other hermit's mother henning just a little longer. He had been even more surprised when Grian had actually agreed to go with him. Though his friend hardly said hardly a word past a polite hello once they had gotten there. But Scar took in stride. He had seen Grian act more nervous, so he'd happily take the progress for what it was. Incidentally, Grian slept through the night after that, suitably tired out by the bundle of energy and enthusiasm that was Scar on the Star Wars rant. Unfortunately for Grian, that gave Mumbo the idea that making Grian go out to meet people might help to tire him out in a more constructive way than periodically skipping whole nights of sleep. And his solution to make that happen was to take all Grian's favorite tea and move it to the communal kitchen instead. And Grian might not be able to remember what Mumbo's disappointed face looked like, but he could imagine that kicked puppy look he'd get if he got caught smuggling the tea back into his apartment. So, begrudgingly, Grian played by the rules. Thankfully, it seemed getting up early had been the right strategy. Aside from a couple more, thankfully planned, meetings with Scar, Grian didn't run into anyone new for over a week. He was getting comfortable enough with his new commute that he was actually startled the first time someone else was around. Oh, hi. Grian froze at the unfamiliar voice, only just schooling himself into not bolting for the safety of Mumbo's flat again. You must be Grian, right? He looked up slowly and nodded. The voice in question was coming from a slightly short, not Grian short, man with a long, thin, scaled tail and a pair of stubby horns protruding from the top of his forehead. He wore a plain black t-shirt and yellow sleep pants and had one arm in a sling. He looked exhausted in a way Grian was unfortunately very familiar with recently. I'm Impulse, he stated plainly before turning back to the counter. Coffee? Grian shook his head, though now his back was turned to him. Why Mumbo insisted on moving his tea to the community kitchen? Well, his motivation behind it had been made very clear, but it was still mean in Grian's opinion. But Impulse seemed as much not a morning person as he was. Grian shuffled around him to collect his tea from one of the lower cupboards. He looked over at a click to see Impulse setting the kettle to boil for him. Grian offered him a strained but polite smile of thanks. Impulse returned it with a slight nod of his head. Nice to meet you, he mumbled into his mug of coffee before slowly shuffling his way out the kitchen. Grian swore the water kettle ran at half power that morning, but he was still eventually able to get his hot water and bolt for safety again before running into anyone else. And that is the end of chapter 6.